The Galactic Council had encountered over 14,000 species across the known universe. From the crystalline Zephyrians who communicated through harmonic frequencies, to the gas-based ethereals who existed in a state of perpetual flux, every species had one thing in common when faced with the Council's authority: they complied. Until they met humanity. When the first human ship, a battered cargo vessel called Lucky Strike, stumbled into Council space through a malfunctioning jump drive, the bureaucrats weren't concerned. Just another primitive species to catalog, regulate, and integrate into the galactic order. The standard compliance protocols had worked for millennia. What they didn't expect was Captain Sarah Chen's response to their demands. What they couldn't have predicted was humanity's peculiar relationship with authority. What they failed to understand was that humans had been telling powerful entities to go stuff themselves for thousands of years, and they weren't about to stop now. This is the story of the day the Galactic Council learned that some species don't just refuse to comply, they make non-compliance an art form. Captain Sarah Chen was having what she generously called one of those days when the aliens decided to ruin it completely. The coffee maker had died somewhere between Jupiter and the asteroid belt, her ship's AI had developed an irritating habit of humming off Keisho tunes, and now her cargo hold smelled like fermented fish sauce thanks to a leak in Container 17. The Lucky Strike wasn't much to look at on a good day, and today definitely wasn't one of those. Captain, called Tommy Martinez from the navigation station, his voice carrying that particular tone that meant things were about to get interesting in all the wrong ways. "We've got company." Sarah looked up from the manifest she'd been pretending to organize and felt her day take another nosedive. Through the viewport, sleek silver ships materialized in perfect formation around her vessel. They moved with the kind of precision that screamed military, bureaucracy, and absolutely no sense of humor. "Well, that's new," she muttered, counting at least 12 ships that probably cost more than Earth's entire GDP. "Tommy, please tell me you didn't accidentally jump us into someone's backyard barbecue." "Negative, Cap. According to our charts, this is supposed to be empty space." "Deep, boring, nobody lives here empty space." The communications array crackled to life before Sarah could respond. A voice emerged, speaking perfect English with the kind of crisp authority that made her want to check if her homework was done. "Unidentified vessel, you have violated Galactic Council jurisdiction. Prepare to be boarded for compliance processing." Sarah blinked. Then, blinked again. "I'm sorry, did they just say Galactic Council?" "That's what it sounded like to me," Tommy replied, scratching his head. "Should I ask them to repeat it?" Before Sarah could answer, the voice continued. "This is Enforcement Vessel Righteous Purpose. You will power down your engines, disable your weapons systems, and prepare for immediate inspection. Resistance will not be tolerated. Compliance is mandatory." Sarah stared at the communication panel like it had just started speaking ancient Sumerian. She'd been hauling cargo for 15 years, and, in all that time, the strangest thing she'd encountered was a drunk Martian customs official who insisted on paying his bribes in livestock. This was definitely uncharted territory. "Captain," whispered Maria Santos from the engineering station, "what do we do?" Sarah considered her options. She could comply, which went against every fiber of her being. She could run, which would probably end badly given the firepower surrounding them. Or she could do what came naturally to a woman who'd grown up in the asteroid colonies, where authority figures were generally viewed with the same enthusiasm as root canals. She opened the channel. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the merchant vessel Lucky Strike. I hate to break it to you folks, but I've never heard of any Galactic Council, and I'm pretty sure I didn't sign up for any compliance processing when I got out of bed this morning." Dead silence filled the channel. Sarah could practically hear the confusion radiating through space. Finally, the voice returned, though it sounded slightly less confident than before. "Captain Chen, ignorance of galactic law is not an acceptable defense. You will comply with our directives immediately." "Here's the thing," Sarah said, settling back in her command chair and putting her feet up on the console in a gesture that would have horrified her academy instructors. "I'm not really a comply immediately kind of person. It's a character flaw my mother used to complain about. So how about we start over? Maybe you could explain exactly who you are and What gives you the authority to order me around in what I thought was free space? The silence stretched longer this time. Sarah could imagine bureaucratic wheels spinning frantically as the aliens tried to figure out how to handle someone who had apparently never read the manual on proper first contact etiquette. Captain Chen, the voice finally said, and this time it carried the patient tone of someone explaining basic mathematics to a particularly slow child. The Galactic Council is the governing body of all civilized species in this galaxy. We maintain order, prevent conflicts, and ensure peaceful coexistence among member races. Your species appears to be unregistered and, therefore, must undergo immediate classification and integration. Ah, Sarah said, nodding as if this made perfect sense. So you're basically the galaxy's homeowners association. Another pause. I do not understand that reference. Sure you do. You folks with the fancy ships and the official titles, telling everyone else how to live their lives. Making rules nobody asked for and expecting everyone to smile and go along with it. Sarah grinned at Tommy, who was watching the exchange with the fascination of someone witnessing a train wreck in slow motion. The thing is, I've dealt with homeowners associations before. They're mostly harmless as long as you don't let them get too big for their britches. Captain Chen, you are being deliberately obtuse. The Galactic Council's authority is absolute and unquestionable. 14,000 species have recognized our jurisdiction without incident. Well, congratulations on your track record, Sarah said cheerfully. But here's where we hit our first little snag. You see, I'm human, and humans have this weird quirk where we get real uncomfortable when somebody tells us something is unquestionable. Makes us want to question it extra hard, just to see what happens. The alien commander, if that's what he was, tried a different approach. Captain, perhaps you do not understand the gravity of your situation. Your vessel is surrounded by ships capable of reducing you to component atoms. Cooperation would be in your best interests. Sarah felt something cold and familiar settle in her chest. It was the same feeling she'd gotten when the corporate suits had tried to foreclose on her family's mining claim, or when the Lunar Authority had insisted she needed a permit to breathe their air. Authority backed by force, demanding submission wrapped up in reasonable-sounding language. She'd never been good at backing down from that particular combination. Let me see if I've got this straight, she said, her voice taking on the deceptively calm tone that made her crew nervous. You folks showed up uninvited, surrounded my ship, made demands, and now you're threatening to atomize me if I don't play along. Is that about the size of it? We are offering you the opportunity to join galactic civilization peacefully. That's a funny way to make an offer, Sarah observed. Where I come from, invitations don't usually come with a fleet of warships and threats of immediate vaporization. Your compliance is required by galactic law. And, there's that word again. Compliance. Sarah stood up, stretching muscles that had been tense since the aliens arrived. You know what? I think I'm starting to see the problem here. You've been dealing with species that roll over and show their bellies the minute you flash your credentials. That's not really how humans work. She could see her crew watching her with expressions ranging from admiration to outright terror. They'd all signed up for cargo runs and the occasional customs inspection, not interstellar incidents that might end with their atoms scattered across 3 star systems. Captain, Tommy said quietly, maybe we should consider their offer. I mean, they seem pretty serious about this whole atomization thing. Sarah looked at her navigator, young, eager, and probably right to be worried, then, back at the communications panel. The smart play would be to comply, get processed or integrated or whatever they wanted to call it, and hope for the best. It was the sensible thing to do. She'd never been particularly sensible either. Here's what we're going to do, she announced, both to her crew and to the alien fleet waiting for her answer. I'm going to invite your representative over for coffee and a civilized conversation about this whole situation. No weapons, no threats, just 2 ship captains working out a misunderstanding like adults. The response came immediately. That is not standard protocol. Well, lucky for both of us, I don't give a damn about your protocol. Sarah's grin was sharp enough to cut glass. You want to talk compliance? Fine. Let's talk. But, we're going to do it face to face, like people who've got enough spine to look each other in the eye. The channel went dead. Sarah turned to her crew, who were staring at her like she'd just declared war on gravity. Maria, see if you can get the coffee maker working. If we're going to make history, we might as well be properly caffeinated for it. Captain, Tommy said weakly, I really don't think this is going to end well. Probably not, Sarah agreed. But, it's going to be memorable as hell. Outside the viewport, the alien ships held their formation, 12 silver threats hanging in the void. Waiting. Inside the Lucky Strike, Sarah Chen prepared to do what humans had always done when faced with overwhelming authority demanding absolute submission. She got ready to cause trouble. The alien who materialized in the Lucky Strike's cargo bay looked exactly like what Sarah had expected from a galactic bureaucrat, tall, impeccably dressed in robes that probably cost more than her ship, and wearing an expression of barely contained irritation that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else in the universe. Captain Chen, he said, his voice carrying the same crisp authority as the radio transmission, though now she could see it belonged to a being with pale blue skin, for arms, and eyes that held the weary patience of someone who'd explained the same regulations to countless primitives. I am Coordinator Veltar of the Galactic Compliance Division. I trust you understand the significant breach of protocol you have forced upon us. Nice to meet you too, Sarah said cheerfully, gesturing to the makeshift table Maria had set up between stacks of cargo containers. Coffee? Maria actually got the machine working, and it's only slightly radioactive today. Veltar stared at the steaming cup like it might explode. I do not consume unknown substances. Your loss. It's got a real kick to it. Sarah took a sip and winced. Okay, maybe more kick than intended. So, Coordinator, let's talk about this compliance business. The alien settled into the chair with the careful precision of someone who suspected it might collapse at any moment. Given the Lucky Strike's maintenance record, his caution wasn't entirely unjustified. The process is quite straightforward, Veltar began, producing a device that projected a holographic display of incomprehensible symbols. Your species will undergo biological and psychological evaluation to determine your classification level. Based on those results, you will be assigned a sector, given appropriate technological limitations, and integrated into the galactic community under proper supervision. Supervision, Sarah repeated, savoring the word like it had left a bad taste in her mouth. That's a fancy way of saying we're going to tell you how to live your lives, isn't it? It is necessary for galactic stability. Unrestricted development has led to countless conflicts throughout history. The Council's guidance prevents such tragedies. Sarah leaned back in her chair, studying the alien bureaucrat with the same attention she'd once given to a particularly tricky asteroid field. Let me ask you something, Veltar. In all these thousands of species you've guided, how many of them asked for your help? The question is irrelevant. Primitive species lack the perspective to understand the benefits of so none of them, Sarah interrupted. Got it. She took another sip of coffee and grimaced. You know, where I come from, we have a word for people who show up uninvited and start making demands about how you should run your life. Enlighten me. Bullies. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Veltar's four eyes blinked in sequence, a gesture that somehow managed to convey both confusion and offense. Captain Chen, I believe you misunderstand the nature of do I? Sarah interrupted again, and this time her voice carried an edge that made Veltar's back straighten. Let me paint you a picture, Coordinator. You showed up with enough firepower to glass a planet, made demands you expected to be obeyed without question, and, when I asked for a conversation, you acted like I'd committed some kind of crime. That sound like helpful guidance to you? The display of force is merely a precaution to ensure compliance with safety protocols. Right. Safety. Sarah stood up and began pacing around the small cargo bay, her movements carrying the restless energy of someone who'd spent too many years being told what was best for her. Funny thing about safety, Veltar. In my experience, the people who talk about it the most are usually the ones you need protection from. The alien coordinator watched her pace with growing unease. Captain, I must stress that resistance to Council authority has never ended favorably for any species. The consequences of non-compliance are severe. There's that word again. Consequences. Sarah stopped pacing and fixed Veltar with a stare that had made customs officials reconsider their life choices. You folks really like your threats, don't you? It's always comply or else with you bureaucratic types. It is not a threat. It is a statement of fact. The Council's authority is backed by the combined fleets of 14,000 species. Resistance is futile. Sarah laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that echoed off the cargo bay walls. Did you just quote the Borg at me? I do not understand that reference. Course you don't. She sat back down and leaned forward, elbows on the table. Let me explain something about humans, Veltar. We've got this unfortunate tendency to do exactly the opposite of what people tell us is impossible. Somebody says we can't fly, we build airplanes. They say we can't go to space, we build rockets. They say resistance is futile. She shrugged. Well, we tend to take that as a challenge. Veltar's expression shifted, and, for the first time, Sarah caught a glimpse of something that might have been uncertainty. Captain, you speak of your species as if you have experience with resistance movements. Surely a merchant captain would understand the benefits of peaceful commerce and regulated trade? Oh, I understand commerce just fine, Sarah said. Been hauling cargo for 15 years, and I've dealt with every kind of authority figure you can imagine. Port officials, customs agents, corporate executives, government bureaucrats, they all have one thing in common. They love to tell people what they can and can't do, and they always have really good reasons why their rules are necessary. Regulation prevents chaos, does it? Sarah's voice cut through his explanation like a blade. Because from where I sit, it looks like regulation creates the kind of universe where a cargo captain can't take a wrong turn without getting surrounded by warships and threatened with atomization. That sound like peaceful coexistence to you? The coordinator's four hands moved in what might have been a gesture of frustration. You are deliberately mischaracterizing our intentions. The Council seeks only to maintain order and prevent the conflicts that arise from uncontrolled expansion. Right. And who decides what counts as a conflict? Who determines which expansions are controlled and which aren't? Sarah leaned back, her expression thoughtful. Let me guess, the Council does. The same folks with the biggest guns and the fanciest ships. What a coincidence. The Council's members have demonstrated their commitment to peace through millennia of cooperation. Have they? Sarah pulled out her personal tablet and scrolled through some data she'd been reviewing earlier. Because according to our long-range sensors, we've detected evidence of at least 3 major fleet movements in the past month. Lot of military activity for such a peaceful organization. Veltar's skin color shifted slightly, taking on what Sarah suspected was the alien equivalent of a blush. Those were routine enforcement actions against non-compliant elements. Ah. Enforcement actions. Sarah nodded as if this explained everything. Against people who wouldn't comply. People like me, I'm guessing. The situations were entirely different. Those species had been given multiple opportunities to integrate peacefully. And, when they refused, the silence stretched between them like a chasm. Veltar's eyes focused on the holographic display, unwilling to meet Sarah's gaze. I see, Sarah said quietly. So the Council's idea of maintaining peace is to blow up anyone who disagrees with them. That's quite a system you've got there. You oversimplify a complex situation, do I? Sarah stood again, but this time her movement was controlled, deliberate. Veltar, I'm going to make you an offer. It's probably not the kind of offer your protocol manual covers, but hear me out. The alien coordinator looked like he wanted to be anywhere else in the galaxy, but he gestured for her to continue. Here's the deal, Sarah said. You go back to your ship, contact your superiors, and explain that humanity isn't interested in your integration program. We'll stay in our corner of space, you stay in yours, and we'll all get along just fine. No muss, no fuss, no enforcement actions required. That is not possible. All species must be classified and integrated for galactic security. Must be. Sarah repeated the phrase like she was tasting something unpleasant. There's that authoritarian thinking again. Let me ask you something, Coordinator. What happens if we just say no? I have already explained the consequences of non-compliance. Right. Atomization, enforcement actions, all that good stuff. Sarah walked over to one of the cargo containers and patted its side affectionately. You know what's in this container, Veltar? The alien glanced at the container with obvious discomfort. I assume trade goods of some kind. Medical supplies, Sarah said. Antibiotics, surgical equipment, water purification tablets. Heading for a colony world that's dealing with a nasty plague outbreak. Nothing fancy, nothing dangerous, just basic humanitarian aid. She turned to face him fully. Now, you could blast my ship to atoms right here and now. Probably wouldn't even slow down your schedule much. But, those colonists? They'd die. Slowly, painfully, because their medication got vaporized in the name of galactic security. Veltar's expression had grown increasingly uncomfortable during her explanation. The Council does not target innocent civilians. Doesn't it? Sarah's voice was deceptively calm. Because according to you, compliance isn't optional. So what happens when those colonists refuse to submit to your authority? What happens when they decide they'd rather govern themselves than live under your supervision? They would be educated about the benefits of council membership. And if education doesn't work? The silence that followed was answer enough. Sarah walked back to the table and sat down, her movements deliberate and controlled. Here's what I think, Veltar. I think you folks have gotten so used to dealing with species that roll over and submit that you've forgotten how to handle anyone with a backbone. You've built this whole system based on the assumption that superior firepower equals legitimate authority. The Council's authority derives from the consent of its member species. Does it? Sarah's laugh was bitter. Or does it derive from the fact that anyone who doesn't consent gets turned into space dust? She leaned forward, her voice dropping to just above a whisper. Let me tell you about humans, Coordinator. We've been dealing with bullies for thousands of years. Kings, emperors, dictators, corporate overlords, they all have the same basic message. Submit or die. And, you know what we learned? Veltar remained silent, his four eyes fixed on her face. We learned that there are things worth dying for, Sarah continued. Freedom. Self-determination. The right to tell some self-important jackass with a fancy title exactly where he can stick his demands for compliance. She stood up and walked to the cargo bay door, gazing out at the stars visible through the small porthole. Your council has encountered 14,000 species, and every single one of them submitted. That's not a track record, Veltar. That's a warning sign. A warning of what? Sarah turned back to him, and her smile was sharp as broken glass. That you've never met anyone who knows how to fight back. 3 days later, Sarah was sitting in the same cargo bay, but this time she wasn't alone. Coordinator Veltar had returned, as she'd expected he would, but he'd brought company. The holographic forms of what appeared to be the entire Galactic Council High Command flickered around the makeshift conference table, their various alien features uniformly arranged in expressions of bureaucratic displeasure. Captain Chen, spoke the apparent leader, a being that looked like someone had crossed a jellyfish with a filing cabinet. I am Supreme Coordinator Zephi. We have reviewed your unusual response to standard integration protocols. Let me guess, Sarah said, settling back in her chair with her coffee cup. You're here to make me a better offer, right? Maybe throw in some shiny baubles or advanced technology to sweeten the deal? The jellyfish bureaucrat's tentacles writhed in what might have been agitation. We are here to understand why your species believes resistance to galactic authority is preferable to the benefits of civilization. Sarah took a sip of coffee and made a face. Maria, I think the radiation levels are getting worse. Sorry, Captain, came Maria's voice from the engineering station. The containment field's been acting up since our guests arrived. No worries. We'll make do. Sarah turned her attention back to the assembled alien leadership.
So, Supreme Coordinator, you want to understand human thinking? Fair enough. Let me ask you something first. How many of those 14,000 species voluntarily joined your council?
All member species recognized the benefits of galactic citizenship after proper consultation, HFY replied smoothly.
That's not what I asked.
Sarah's voice carried the patience of someone explaining basic concepts to a particularly slow child.
How many came to you asking to join? How many said, "Hey, this council thing sounds great, sign us up"?
The assembled holograms exchanged what appeared to be uncomfortable glances. Finally, a reptilian being with too many teeth spoke up. The integration process varies depending on each species' level of development.
Right. Sarah nodded as if this explained everything. So 0. None of them asked to join.
You showed up, made demands, and they all rolled over.
Is that about the size of it?
Primitive species often lack the perspective to understand the benefits of, there's that word again.
Primitive. Sarah's expression hardened.
You know, for such an advanced civilization, you folks have a real problem with basic concepts like consent and self-determination. Supreme Coordinator HFY's form shimmered with what might have been irritation.
Captain Chan, your species' attachment to these outdated concepts is precisely why guidance is necessary.
Individual determination leads to chaos, conflict, and, ultimately self-destruction.
Does it?
Sarah stood and began pacing again, her movements carrying the restless energy that made her crew nervous and aliens uncomfortable. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like your guidance has created a galaxy full of species that have forgotten how to think for themselves. She gestured toward the holographic assembly. 14,000 species, all following the same rules, all thinking the same thoughts, all living under the same system.
You know what that sounds like to me?
Enlighten us, HFY said dryly. Stagnation, Sarah replied.
A galaxy-spanning culture of yes-men who've traded their independence for the illusion of security. When was the last time any of your member species came up with something genuinely innovative? Something that challenged the status quo or pushed boundaries?
Innovation is carefully regulated to prevent dangerous developments, another alien administrator interjected.
Unrestricted research leads to weapons proliferation and planetary destruction. Ah, yes. Regulation. Sarah's laugh was bitter. The bureaucrat's answer to everything. Can't have people thinking dangerous thoughts or asking uncomfortable questions.
Much safer to just tell them what to think and trust that they'll comply. She stopped pacing and fixed the Supreme Coordinator with a stare that had made corporate executives reconsider their life choices.
You want to know what makes humans different? We don't comply. It's not that we can't, we just won't.
We've spent our entire history telling authority figures to go stuff themselves, and we're not about to stop now.
Your defiance is noted, HFY said coldly. However, individual preference cannot supersede galactic security. Your species will be integrated, peacefully if possible. And, if not peacefully? The assembled aliens fell silent.
The threat hung in the air like a toxin, unspoken but understood by everyone present.
Sarah smiled, and the expression was sharp enough to cut glass. There it is.
The iron fist under the velvet glove.
Submit or die.
You know, for such enlightened beings, you folks sure fall back on the same old authoritarian playbook. Captain Veltar spoke up for the first time since the conference began. Perhaps we could discuss alternative arrangements.
Modified integration protocols that allow for greater autonomy, no.
Sarah's voice cut through his diplomatic suggestion like a blade.
No integration. No protocols. No supervision. No guidance. No compliance.
She walked over to the cargo bay window and gazed out at the human ships that had arrived over the past 3 days. Word had spread quickly through Earth's merchant fleet, and captains had come from across human space to see what the fuss was about. They weren't warships, just traders, haulers, and independent operators who'd heard that someone was demanding humanity submit to alien authority. They'd come to see the show.
You want to know what makes humans really dangerous? Sarah continued, her back still turned to the alien assembly.
It's not our weapons or our technology or our tactical brilliance. It's our complete inability to accept that something is impossible just because someone in authority says it is. She turned back to face them, and her expression was thoughtful.
You've been at this for how long? Millennia? And, in all that time,
You've never encountered a species that told you no?
not really.
Oh, I'm sure some of them put up a fight at first, but they all came around eventually. They all saw reason. The benefits of council membership are self-evident to any rational species, HFY insisted.
Are they? Sarah's voice was deceptively calm. Or have you just gotten really good at convincing people that resistance is futile?
She walked back to the table and sat down, her movements deliberate and controlled. Let me paint you a picture, Supreme Coordinator. You've got your 14,000 member species, all following your rules, all living under your supervision. Everything's peaceful, orderly, civilized.
But, what happens when a real threat comes along? Something you can't regulate or control or integrate?
The Council's combined fleets are more than capable of handling any external threat.
Maybe. But, what about an internal one?
Sarah leaned forward, her voice dropping to just above a whisper.
What happens when your carefully controlled galaxy produces something genuinely unexpected? When one of those supervised species develops a technology you don't understand or asks a question you can't answer?
The assembled aliens exchanged uncomfortable glances. Sarah pressed her advantage.
See, that's the thing about authoritarian systems.
They're incredibly good at maintaining order, but they're terrible at adaptation.
They breed conformity, not innovation. Compliance, not creativity. And, when something comes along that doesn't fit their neat little categories, she shrugged. They break.
Your species will comply, HFY said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence.
The alternative is unacceptable. To who? Sarah asked. To you? Because it seems perfectly acceptable to me.
She stood and walked to one of the cargo containers, pulling out a small device that looked like a cross between a radio and a hand grenade.
You know what this is?
The aliens stared at the device with obvious unease.
Unknown technology, Veltar said finally. It's a quantum communicator, Sarah explained cheerfully. Instantaneous communication across any distance.
No lag, no interference, no way to block or intercept the signal.
We've been using them to coordinate our response to your little visit.
She activated the device, and suddenly, the cargo bay was filled with voices. Hundreds of them, speaking in dozens of languages, all saying variations of the same thing.
This is Captain Morrison of the Iron Will. We stand with humanity.
Captain Okafor, Merchant Vessel Lagos Pride.
Count us in.
Asterisk New Tokyo Express asterisk, ready for orders.
Asterisk Sao Paulo Runner asterisk, standing by.
The voices continued, a growing chorus of defiance that echoed through the small cargo bay.
Sarah let them speak for several minutes before deactivating the communicator.
1,500 ships, she said casually.
Merchants, haulers, prospectors, colony ships, every human vessel within 100 light-years of Earth. They've all said the same thing. No compliance. No integration. No submission.
She sat back down and took a sip of her coffee, ignoring the way the assembled aliens stared at her in what might have been shock. Now, I'm just a cargo captain, Sarah continued conversationally. I don't know much about galactic politics or grand strategy.
But, I do know something about logistics.
And, I'm thinking that trying to integrate a species that doesn't want to be integrated might be a little more complicated than your usual protocols suggest. Supreme Coordinator HFY's form flickered with what appeared to be agitation. Captain Chen, you cannot seriously believe that 1,500 primitive vessels could stand against the combined might of the Galactic Council.
Primitive? Sarah's laugh was sharp. You know, you folks keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
She activated another device, and the cargo bay's walls became transparent, showing the space outside where human ships floated in loose formation around the Lucky Strike. They looked exactly like what they were, working vessels, built for function rather than intimidation. "See, the thing about us primitives," Sarah said, "is that we're really good at making do with what we've got. Take my ship, for example. It's old, it's ugly, and it smells like fermented fish sauce. But it's got one thing your fancy council vessels don't." "Which is?" Sarah's grin was predatory. "It's expendable." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah could see the exact moment when the implications sank in, not just for the Supreme Coordinator, but for the entire alien assembly. "You see," she continued, her voice conversational, "when you've got 14,000 species all following the same rules, using the same tactics, thinking the same thoughts, well, it makes you predictable. You show up with overwhelming force, make demands, and expect compliance because that's how it's always worked before." She gestured toward the fleet of human ships visible through the transparent walls. "But we're not like your other species. We don't have anything to lose because we never had anything to begin with. We're merchants, traders, outcasts, people who chose to live in the void between the stars rather than submit to authority." Sarah stood and walked to the communication console. "And that makes us very, very dangerous. Because when you've got nothing to lose and everything to gain, you tend to take risks that more sensible people wouldn't consider." She activated the console, broadcasting on all frequencies. "This is Captain Sarah Chen to all human vessels. Begin Operation Independence." Across the fleet, cargo bays opened and ships began releasing their contents into space. But instead of trade goods or supplies, they released clouds of metallic dust, sensor decoys, and communication drones. Within minutes, the space around Earth was filled with electronic noise and false signatures. "Chaff," Sarah explained to the stunned alien assembly. "Simple, primitive, and incredibly effective against sophisticated sensor systems. In about 10 minutes, your targeting computers won't be able to tell a human ship from a piece of space junk." "You cannot hide an entire fleet indefinitely," SciFi protested, but his voice carried less conviction than before. "We don't need to hide," Sarah replied. "We just need to be unpredictable. See, that's the thing about humans, we're really good at chaos. It's one of our finest qualities." She activated the quantum communicator again, and this time the voices carried a different message. "All ships, begin random jump sequences. Perth Wanderer jumping to Sol 4. Mumbai Express heading for the asteroid belt. Kansas City Hauler jumping to Proxima Centauri." One by one, the human ships began disappearing, jumping to random destinations across human space. Some went to Earth's colonies, others to mining stations or research outposts. A few simply vanished into the deep void, their destinations known only to their captains. 1,500 ships, Sarah said softly, carrying 1,500 captains who now know exactly how your integration process works. They're spreading the word to every human settlement, every colony, every outpost. By tomorrow, every human in space will know that the Galactic Council demands compliance." She sat back down and fixed the Supreme Coordinator with a stare that could have melted steel. "And you know what they're going to say?" The alien assembly waited in tense silence. Sarah's smile was sharp as broken glass. "They're going to say no." Supreme Coordinator Zephai's form flickered with obvious agitation. "This changes nothing. The Council's authority remains absolute. Your species will comply or face the consequences." "Will we?" Sarah asked conversationally. "Because I'm thinking your consequences might be a little harder to implement than you're used to. After all, it's one thing to intimidate a species that stays in one place and follows predictable patterns. It's something else entirely to chase down 1,500 independently operated vessels across 100 star systems." She took another sip of coffee and grimaced. "Maria, remind me to file a complaint about the radiation shielding when we get home." "Already on it, Captain," came the reply from the engineering station. Sarah turned her attention back to the alien assembly. "So, Supreme Coordinator, here's where we stand. You can try to enforce your compliance on a species that's scattered across dozens of star systems, operates independently, and has a cultural aversion to authority. Or what? Or you can do something revolutionary, Sarah said. You can leave us alone. The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge.
Zephai's tentacles writhed in apparent agitation. The Council cannot simply ignore an entire species.
Precedent must be maintained.
Must it?
Sarah's voice carried the patience of someone explaining basic concepts to a child.
Says who? Your 14,000-member species? The same folks who submitted without a fight because they were too scared to say no?
She stood and began pacing again, her movements carrying the restless energy that made aliens uncomfortable.
Here's a wild idea, Supreme Coordinator. What if, and, I know this is crazy, what if you just let people make their own choices? What if you stopped assuming that your way is the only way and admitted that maybe, just maybe, some species might know what's best for themselves? Chaos would result, another alien administrator protested.
Without proper guidance, primitive species inevitably destroy themselves.
Do they?
Sarah stopped pacing and fixed the speaker with a stare.
Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like the real danger isn't chaos, it's stagnation.
You've created a galaxy where no one thinks for themselves, where innovation is regulated out of existence, where asking uncomfortable questions is considered a security threat. She walked back to the communications console and activated a display showing Earth's solar system.
You want to see what chaos looks like? That's my homeworld.
Third planet from a yellow star, populated by a species that's been at war with itself for its entire recorded history. We've invented thousands of ways to kill each other, and we've used most of them. The display shifted, showing images of human cities, space stations, and colonies. And yet somehow, despite all that chaos and conflict and primitive thinking, we've managed to spread across dozens of star systems.
We've built civilizations, created art, developed technologies that would make your bureaucrats nervous. All without anyone's guidance or supervision. She turned back to the alien assembly. So maybe, and, again, I know this is a radical concept, maybe chaos isn't the problem you think it is.
Supreme Coordinator Zephai's form shimmered with what appeared to be deep agitation.
Your species development is irrelevant. Galactic law requires galactic law? Sarah's laugh was bitter. Whose law? Did my species have a voice in writing these laws? Did any of your 14,000 members get to vote on whether they wanted to be governed by them? The silence that followed was answer enough. Sarah nodded as if this confirmed everything she'd suspected. That's what I thought. So we're back to the same old authoritarian playbook. Submit to laws you had no voice in creating, enforced by people you never chose, for the benefit of a system that serves everyone except you. She walked to the cargo bay window and gazed out at the stars. You know what, Supreme Coordinator? I think I'm starting to understand your problem. You've spent so long dealing with species that accepted your authority without question that you've forgotten what legitimate government actually looks like. The Council's authority derives from the necessity of maintaining galactic order.
No, Sarah said quietly, her back still turned to the assembly. Your authority derives from the fact that you've got bigger guns than anyone else. That's not government, that's conquest with better marketing. She turned back to face them, and her expression was thoughtful. Let me ask you something. What happens to your galactic order when it encounters something it can't control? When it meets a species that doesn't fit your neat little categories? Such a situation has never arisen. Hasn't it? Sarah's smile was sharp. Because it seems to me that's exactly what's happening right now. She activated the quantum communicator one last time, and the cargo bay filled with voices again. But this time they weren't human voices. This time they were speaking in languages Sarah had never heard, with accents that suggested they came from very far away indeed. This is Captain Velkash of the Hegemony Fleet. We have monitored your transmissions. Commander YXTEL, Void Runners Guild. Your resistance protocols are noted. Captain Zarthin, Free Traders Collective. Humanity's defiance is inspiring.
The voices continued, representing species and organizations that Sarah had never heard of.
Some sounded friendly, others neutral, a few carried an edge that suggested they were very interested in what humanity had to say about galactic authority.
Sarah let them speak for several minutes before deactivating the communicator.
The alien assembly stared at her in what appeared to be shock.
"Turns out we're not the only species that has problems with authority," Sarah said casually. "Funny how word gets around when someone finally stands up to the galaxy's self-appointed peacekeepers."
Supreme Coordinator Zephai's form flickered rapidly, a sign of what Sarah suspected was barely controlled panic. "Those are fringe elements, pirates, criminals, malcontents who reject civilized society."
"Are they?" Sarah's voice was deceptively calm. "Or are they just people who never agreed to let you make their decisions for them?" She sat back down and took a final sip of her coffee, making a face at the taste.
"Here's the thing, Supreme Coordinator.
You've built your entire system on the assumption that might makes right. That superior firepower equals legitimate authority. That compliance can be enforced through intimidation."
Sarah stood and walked to the cargo bay door, her hand resting on the control panel.
"But you made one critical mistake. You assumed that everyone would be too scared to call your bluff."
"It is not a bluff," Zephai protested.
"The Council's power is absolute." "Is it?" Sarah's finger hovered over the door control. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like your absolute power just ran into an immovable object."
"And we all know what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object." She pressed the control, and the cargo bay door began to open.
"Something breaks."
The alien assembly flickered and wavered as the atmospheric pressure changed. Veltar and his physical form hurriedly moved toward their shuttle as alarms began sounding throughout both ships. "Captain Shan," Zephai's voice carried a note of desperation.
"This is not over. The Council will not tolerate defiance indefinitely."
Sarah paused at the door, her hand still on the control panel.
"You're right. It's not over. It's just beginning."
She stepped through the doorway and looked back one last time. "Give my regards to your 14,000 compliant species, Supreme Coordinator. Tell them that somewhere out there, there's a bunch of primitive humans who said no to the most powerful authority in the galaxy." Her smile was sharp as broken glass. "And tell them we're still here." The door sealed shut behind her, leaving the alien assembly to contemplate a universe that had suddenly become much more complicated than their protocols had prepared them for. In the void outside, human ships continued their chaotic dance among the stars, carrying word of defiance to every corner of their space. Behind them, alien vessels held their positions, their weapons trained on targets that were no longer there. And, somewhere in the vast darkness between the stars, other species, pirates, criminals, malcontents, and free peoples who had never accepted the Council's authority, began to wonder if perhaps the time for compliance had finally come to an end.